for black and brown teachers. And we'll figure out a way to get them to get into that profession and get them into the classroom.
Yeah.
We're going to spend a whole bunch of money doing some other things, but until we can cross that cultural barrier and really relate to our kids.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I coach at Riley, and I've had a number of my former athletes that when they graduate, they don't know quite what to do. I really try to get them to look at teaching, because I think it's really important.
So I'm hoping that somewhere down the road, the administration can make that a focus.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where we're going to be some road when it comes to training our students well. So just
Do you mind?
I'm done.
Thank you. Could you share with us, is there any, the last time we were on a conference call with the DOJ, I had specifically asked what their focus is, because there's a lot of discussion going on around the code of conduct, so I wanted to hear specifically what their exact focus is, and can you tie that in with the code of conduct? Can you share?
Sure. So just generally, when you have a desegregation order like this, and kind of what the federal law requires with regard to non-discrimination, non-discriminatory practices, as the compliance plan, much of the compliance plan is targeted on kind of our disparate discipline and trying to address the disparities we have in discipline. From the Department of Justice's standpoint, what they're looking for is to make sure that we are not discriminatory in our practices. So to the extent we have disparities, making sure that it's not because of discrimination on our part. And a lot of what we're doing is not just based on discrimination. So the MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support, that's not discrimination or not discrimination. That's how do we support students to make sure that we're addressing disparities in other ways as well. The other thing that the DOJ is particularly concerned about, that, or another way to look at it, I guess, is to say, like, if you have two students that have the same behavior, making sure that however you respond to those students is the same. That if they're similarly situated, if they've done the same thing, that you're seeing consistency, not just within the schools, but across schools as well. And so that's been a lot of their focus as well, is to make sure that so even as they reviewed the code of conduct, they were looking to make sure that they talked about it being not discriminatory on its face, meaning there isn't something in there that says we're going to treat people differently. And then they also kind of sussed out like where there was potential vagueness or potential for inconsistency. Some of it is just inconsistent within the document and making sure we're cleaning those up. But some of that was as well, like, is there an opportunity here where one school might do something different than another school, or there may be confusion over that. So, for example, and this was a remnant from the current code of conduct, where schools were allowed to create their own kind of rules. There was something in there that said that. We cleaned that up. We wanted to make sure that there isn't that opportunity, or schools weren't confused that, hey, I can create my own rules that may not be the same at another school. We want to make sure that it's all within the code of conduct and that that's implemented with consistency as well.
So then the focus is primarily as it pertains to our law, the HA 1419 law, which is where we got all this to begin with. There's supposed to be a real focus on how the adult responds to the child's behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's a couple pieces to this. So the code of conduct is really just a document that's going to say, here are behaviors we don't want to see in our schools, and it's going to lay out, here's what you can expect from a response. And that what you can expect from a response, there's a couple things. One, from an adult standpoint, students should know what we expect of them, or what we expect, how we expect them not to behave. But adults should also understand that we can't just kind of make up behaviors. These are the behaviors that we've prescribed, and if it doesn't fall within this, then it's not a behavior that's going to get you in trouble. On the other side of that, the responses that we have, those responses need to be consistent, and so we shouldn't exceed responses. That is going to constrain adults in what they can do. The other part of that is how it's implemented, right? So making sure that in this we have kind of restorative practices, built-in expectations that this is a learning model. It's not a punitive thing. It's meant to be instructive. It's meant to be the type of thing when you try to understand what's happening with the student and can get the supports in place that students may need, or respond appropriately, and not just in a punitive manner. One of the things I say is, like, you can, if you send a student out of the classroom, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to change their behavior. And how are you serving that student? And our purpose is to be educational. So a part of that code of conduct as well is how are we going to use it, how are we going to apply it? And again, that applies to the adults. That is not the students applying it. That's how are the adults going to respond to things? What are our expectations as far as the processes that they use? What are our expectations as far as the responses to behavior and the limits, so that we're not exceeding, we're not, again, that consistency. And some of that as well, the other thing that I kind of highlight is that this is related to goal number 5 in our compliance plan. There are other parts of that compliance plan that are really designed to have a whole system in place. And so part of that is to really be able to identify through data review teams and other kind of data review processes, identify what's going on with our discipline data, try to identify root causes. So is that an issue where we have a teacher that's a problem and that teacher needs support? Or maybe we're identifying that the student, we're seeing kind of things and that student needs not behavioral responses, not punitive responses, but more how do we get them into tier 2 supports, tier 3 supports? Do they need to be referred for a potential IEP? So it's being able to take that data and have a system in place to identify those issues before they become, so we're not just responding to them, we're being proactive and really kind of to create those supports. And then goal 4, which is multi-tiered systems of supports, is really designed to have those systems in place. So that instead of when you have a student, if you're an administrator and the student comes into your office and you're looking and saying, here's this behavior, all I know is this code of conduct that tells me I should suspend this kid. Instead, we've got supports in place where we're saying, okay, we've identified some potential concerns here. And some of what we see in that code of conduct as well is we have social worker referrals as a requirement. We have parent conferences as a requirement. So it's not just like send the kid out, it's not just punish. It's really meant to be support and how do we, and I would say avoid the word correct. We're not correcting behavior, we're educating and supporting students so that they're given the opportunity to do the best they can. And multi-tiered systems of supports, having those systems in place as we build those out, gives administrators and other support staff an avenue that isn't just suspension. It's I'm recognizing an issue with the student, the social worker's involved now, the social worker, we're having these conversations. This is a student that doesn't need to just go home and be suspended. This is a student that needs other support, so we're moving them to tier 2 or tier 3 supports. So I went a little farther afield, I think, or further afield, but that's as you look at that code of conduct, the adult responsibilities, there's a lot that we really are trying to put on adults, but at its core, you do have to be able to identify behaviors and identify responses, and then it's all about how are we implementing it, training and making sure that our teachers and staff understand our expectations, and then making sure that we have the systems and avenues to support the students, and then holding people accountable and making sure that our administrators and our teachers are implementing it with consistency and are following it and are having those systems in place and maintaining those systems and using them. So I've talked a lot about stuff that Stephanie is probably the expert in, and Tessa and Taylor as well, and Angel, so I want to make sure that I give them the opportunity to kind of address some of this too. So because I am not the expert in this, I'm here to kind of talk a little bit about the law and how we got here, but I want to make sure that our experts are able to tell you all the things that I fear I'm kind of saying.
Is there a manual that people can look? Do you have a manual with you that they?
The one I have, so the shared rights and responsibilities that I have is marked up right now. I don't know if we have hard copies, but if anybody would like to view, we are still. We've got some tweaks based on what the DOJ has done. We've communicated to the DOJ, but that will be on board docs as well on, I believe, Friday. That would go public, so the latest it would be Friday, but if folks would like documents sooner, we can take emails and get it to folks too.
So the DOJ already signed off on it?
I have, they did send an email today saying they're fine with it going in front of the board. I believe that's a document I shared with board members as well as the revision committee, so it's the most recent one that was shared with the committee and the board.
I just want to raise the issue for the sake of raising it. I can appreciate the direction that the school corporation is going, but I want to make sure, and when I say I appreciate the direction, where the principals are spending more time in the classroom with the teachers, because one of the main problems is the number of referrals that certain teachers are having. who they are sending as it relates to office referrals. There are certain teachers, when they send kids to the office, I'll talk to the student and say, who sent you? And when they tell me, I say, okay, I already know that there's a problem there. And so hopefully, while the principals are in the classroom, that these issues get addressed, because teachers in the classroom really don't know how to handle our students.
And that's the piece of that data review team, which will be meeting regularly at the school level, is to look at that type of data and identify, like we're seeing this teacher had this number of referrals and it's way out of whack for everybody else, what's going on there. And it gives the opportunity to identify and then allow the administrator to have that conversation with the teacher. And, and I would hope, like, looking at how do we support that teacher, but teachers beyond support as well, holding them accountable, right? So it's a piece of that. And again, having clarity around our expectations for teachers with regard to how you fill out an ODR, our expectations with regard to, and some of that is simple enough where, the office discipline referral, and you'd be familiar with this when you see them, right, is making sure that it's not just a comment that, student A trips student B, right? Like really having that, an expectation and building that practice where we're going to talk a little bit about what led to that. What were the circumstances around that? What happened? How did, and then what were the consequences of that? So that the administrator has the best ability to kind of review that, ask better questions of the students, follow up with the adults if they need to follow up with the adults for more information, and then really kind of classify it appropriately and proceed with that kind of really responses that are meant to be restorative, educational, and supportive, not just, okay, you tripped them, you're out, right? And so it's a big system. There's a lot of kind of moving pieces. And again, I'll kind of emphasize, I mean, the code of conduct is an important piece of that. But a lot of what we're doing as well is making sure that we have good direction and expectations, accountability built into how we expect people to apply and use the code of conduct, and then systems to kind of follow up and make sure and check and kind of regular training, and as well as kind of longer term, a system in place to continue to review the code of conduct or discipline practices. How are those systems working? Is this code working? Do we need to make additional changes? Because I know just kind of personally, in taking it out of even the legal context, I look at this and I think this was a good start. But it had been years since we'd even looked at it. We're going to have to continue to monitor this year, next year, and really every year to make sure that it's working for the people it needs to work for. And I mean everybody, right? Like it's doing what it's supposed to do, it's doing what we want to do, and it's supporting our ultimate goal, which is to educate every child and give them every opportunity to succeed. And we can't do that if we're just move you out of the classroom, focus on you, you come back, we'll move you back out of the classroom. No, it's gotta be something more. I really don't want to be a complete face because so many people did so much work on this. I want to make sure the right people get up here to be able to talk about the work they did. So
could you answer just one quick question before you? Could you explain the police aspect of the code of conduct? Because there is a section in there that involves police.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, something I heard today, and I just want to confirm it to make sure. Is that policy about if a child gets 2 suspensions, the principal can report it to the BMV, and that will hinder them from getting their driver's license and learner's permit? Is that in here? I hope not.
No, there's a reference to that as a possibility, but that statute is actually for, I don't know if it's suspensions. My understanding is it's unexcused absences. It is optional, and we as a district do not, as a matter of course, do that.
Because the board hasn't voted on that.
Right, and there is a reference to it because it is law that allows it, but from an unexcused absence standpoint, one of the things, and this is a little bit different, from unexcused absences were kind of built in with like tardies, or we were defining truancy as leaving the classroom when you're already there. So there's a little bit of this, the in and out, which is potentially a disruptive practice to the classroom, which is very different from an unexcused absence. If a student isn't there, that's not necessarily disruptive to the classroom, but we need to be following up to say, what's going on with the student, following up with parents. So there's some pretty clear guidelines that we've added with regard to that. But the referral obligations to, even under that unexcused absence, we do not, under the code of conduct, indicate that people should refer to the BMV. to the extent there's a referral obligation, there is a chronic, habitual absenteeism, which isn't technically defined, but we want to make sure that we're supporting, right? If a parent isn't responding to us, or if efforts to kind of work with a student and a parent aren't working, and there are other issues, really we want to make sure that we're meeting our legal obligations. But part of that is going to be referral to Casey Center, potentially referral to the JJC with regard to their definition of truancy. I think our bigger concern in that instance is contacting the parents. We have, I think, 4 markers, trying to get the parents in, trying to develop a plan, trying to make sure that we're following that plan. And then, after 10 unexcused absence, that's an opportunity. But we will refer to the central office attendance and coordinator of, I think, student attendance and engagement. And so that is a discussion then that happens at that, and how do we handle this? And it's going to depend on the circumstances, right? If we think a student's in trouble, we want to make sure that we're referring to the Casey Center, the right folks. If we feel there's other needs, we have some of those tools there.
I for one I really want to discuss that further, because even for it to be referred to me sends up a red flag. And one more, the criminal organization policy, that's another dangerous one. That's not written in there either, right?
No, I don't believe that is. So there are specific kind of, by law, right, there are some things we have to refer to SROs by if we get, a weapon in school, or, a really kind of assault and battery, not just a school fight. And we do differentiate in the code of conduct that a school fight, a mutual combat is not something you refer to the police, right? If it reaches a level where it's one-sided aggression or something where there's a serious injury, that may be a different matter. But we have some specific guidelines. Generally, they're following the statutes, consistent with the statutes, and when we refer to the police. The gang activity, I do not believe is in there, because this is going to be specific activity of children. And being affiliated with a gang is not behavior, right? That's just like, even if we have students like that, we're really focused on what is the behavior, right? What are you doing? Is there drugs in school, weapons in school, fighting, and that gets classified that way.
Well, the policy I'm referring to is not to focus on the behaviors, focus on the teacher actually having the power and the authority to say that this child is involved in a gang. That's where the danger comes in. And you weren't in the corporation, I don't think, because about 4 or 5 years ago, the community stood up against the BMV policy and the gang activity. And also the NAACP has a resolution against those 2 policies. So it was brought to my attention today, and that's why I'm bringing it up now, that that is included in the code of conduct. So what you're telling me is that is not included, other than a referral about the BMV.
Yeah, allow me to double check that, just because I don't have it kind of memorized, but I do not recall that. That's something that I recall seeing. But let me double check it. So that
and if you would please get back with me in the morning,
yep,
so we can further discuss, and I'll do that with the full board on Monday.
I would really like to let our folks present, because there's a lot of good information in this too, and I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. So thank you, Stephanie.
So good evening. So our purpose tonight is really to just share with you the content of what is in the revised rights and responsibilities, so that you'll know just an overview of what's there. And so it is a comprehensive code of conduct that should be used by all South Bend community schools. It outlines the roles of appropriate discipline to achieve quality education for every student every day. It has 2 components. It clearly articulates the student behavior expectations, and then it provides guidance for responding when behavior does not meet that expectation. And it includes information about culturally responsive positive behavior intervention systems that includes restorative strategies to repair harm and address the whole child equitably and with accountability. So it is a guide to create an opportunity for us to have good positive discourse around the expectations of what we expect to see from our students, and then how we are supposed to respond to those behaviors. So Angel Ash is going to share who should read the student shared rights and responsibilities, and where and when it applies.
Good evening. So as we talk about the student rights and responsibilities, there's a lot into it. But for the sake of this presentation, we want to just mention that our students are responsible for knowing a little bit more about their rights and responsibilities. This again serves as a guide for their behavior and what they're doing in and outside of the school activities. We want to make sure that this serves as a guide for all of our parents and our guardians so that they understand what the behavior expectations are for our students. We want to make sure that the school staff is using this as a guide to support positive behavior and to, what I want to say is provide additional support for any type of protocols to address certain behaviors. And then for school administration and district staff, we too also use the student rights and responsibilities as a guide. We use it in addressing student behavior needs, but then also we want to make sure that as a district we're developing a lot of sustainable and positive interventions within the school environment. I don't have to. Good. All right. And where and when does this apply? So, all times of the school day. So we're talking about on the bus, on the way to school, after school, during school activities, going to and from games and things of that nature, but then also anything that happens outside of the school that comes back into the school and disrupts the student educational process. And where does this apply? I think the biggest change is we know that this is going to apply with all of our schools where the buses and anything that pertains to that, but the new addition is the computer system and its network. We want to make sure that this guideline is there to support all students and staff and our teachers to make sure that we know what our kids are doing online as well. And who? All of our students.
Before,
I'm sorry.
may I make a comment before you leave the when and where? I coached for 21 years, and 16 of them was at Washington. And one thing that most people don't know, and we talking about when and where, if an athlete get caught at somebody's house drinking underage during the summer when school is not in, they can be disqualified from participating in sports and following season. Nobody talks about that, but that's then the parents need to know that and the kids need to know that.
Didn't know.
So how should the shared rights and responsibilities be used? So as I mentioned, it is a guide, it guides students to how to have most appropriate and positive behavior. So there's lots of things in there for teachers to use for them to be able to guide that positive behavior and expectation that we hope to see. And then how to respond to inappropriate behavior. So in doing that, we blend together the culturally responsive positive behavior intervention systems. PBIS, or Positive Behavior Intervention Systems, is inherently culturally responsive because what it does is it creates an opportunity for us to use data to make good decisions. What happens when you look at that data and you drill down and you can see very obvious things, you have to be more intentional with your practices to addressing those different things that come out of the data that you review. So it is a universal multi-tiered system of support framework. It addresses behavior needs for each building. Like I mentioned, it uses data to respond to the student's needs. So when we're looking at good multi-tiered systems of support, or tier 1, that's with classroom instruction. That's for everybody. So we want to make sure that we are doing good tier 1 practices and how we collect our data to see what our students need and applying interventions that make sense to what that data directs those needs to be. We're using an interconnected systems framework which integrates mental health and academic interventions together. It states that mental health is for everybody. It's not just for those kids who we think behave inappropriately. Mental health is for everyone. It's a single delivery system. So it's your mental health practitioners and your instructors at the table at the same time, talking through what those student needs are. it says that access isn't enough. So having a social worker or a counselor in the building is just not enough. We gotta be intentional with how we provide those interventions and those wraparound supports to all of our students. And also, we have to have a system and a process that allows us to talk through these things in a succinct way so that we're making equitable decisions for all of our students. The restorative practices or restorative justice education that's integrated into the shared rights and the responsibilities is designed to help us remedy harm and prevent inappropriate behavior. It's for school staff, parents, guardians. It creates an opportunity for us to have responsible, cultivating restorative mindset, and then using appropriate interventions that best fit the student needs.
Excuse me, I hate to keep jumping in, but could you go back? All right, you talked about PBIS, and I just got to have this conversation. You talked about using PBIS data, positive behavior intervention system. I hate to say it, but the data's not right, because you have disparity in the data. And when I say that, just like you have disparity in sending the kids to the office, and is everyone here familiar with what PBIS is? Anybody know? Oh, okay, it's a system that is designed for the teachers to look for positive behavior in students and then give them rewards for their positive behavior.
So
And then it builds relationship between the student and the teacher.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that has been a common misconception for positive behavior intervention systems. PBIS ultimately is the opportunity to use data to address the needs for students. It is for the adults. It is designed to help the adults understand how to best meet the needs. Not the reward system is even for the adults too. Right. So everyone has kind of created this opportunity that PBIS is the reward system, but it's not. It's really an opportunity for us to use data so that we can best understand how to meet the needs. And right now, I do understand that our data is a little bit skewed because people are not reporting things in the right way. But what this is designed to do is create an opportunity for us to have intentional conversations around how that data is collected. So our multi-tiered systems of support process is supposed to guide PBIS in a way that we are having more integral conversations around how that data is collected. So when we see with the team in the building and with the district administrators and with the building administrators so that we can correct those issues. And as we've had it previously, we've not used PBIS in the right way. So right now, we are getting ready to start that process of redirecting that because this is a huge culture shift. Yeah. Everyone mentions that they have PBIS, but they've not been using it in a way that it's been designed. So what we've done is we've created an opportunity for intention through multi-tiered system of support coaches. So we have a classroom coach and we have a mental health coach. Those two individuals work specifically with each of the buildings because we're using a cohort model of implementation. So we are folding in new cohorts every year. So we've had 2 cohorts so far. This year we're going to roll in cohorts 3 and 4. So these 2 coaches go to the buildings, work with the building teams, and help them to understand how to use that data to address the needs of the building. And so right now we're also working with the academic innovations team so that when we're looking at that data, we're creating an opportunity to address those disparities in data. So the way that things are being recorded in the office discipline reports in a different way. So if we're looking at this section that's called null, what does null mean? So we can't take, if all of our reports are null, we can't address the need if it's all regarded to null because we don't know what null means. So that means that we have an issue with the way the data is being reported. So then as a district, we have to wrap around that and address that need so that we can succinctly do it throughout the whole corporation and not just for one building. So I do see what you're saying about making sure that the disparity in the data is responded to, and that's what we're earnestly working on so that we can make sure that everybody gets the same thing throughout the entire district. Other questions? Okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about responding to inappropriate behavior. And when we talk about that, it's really a 6-step process that we like to see exercised in the building. It begins with a redirect to corrective behavior. And that is simply through using restorative questions and mediation, conversation tactics to explore the behaviors, the root cause of what's happening. And we do this in order to minimize, we want to minimize escalation, so we're not antagonizing our students, we're not putting, gas on the fire. But we also want to minimize the recurrence of those behaviors as well. So we really want to get down to the root cause and understand why it's happening so we can address that. The next thing would be to intervene, resolve conflict in a manner that keeps students and staff safe, and make every reasonable effort to notify parents or guardians. So in this process, we want to make sure that we are keeping our parents and guardians informed and that we're not taking the student through a whole day-long process of whatever's happening in the building and they don't know anything about it. We are going to investigate. This includes talking to all involved, not just taking the teacher or adult's word for it, but also looking for any other students that were around, any other staff, all witnesses. And in the few cases that we do need to conduct a search and seizure, we want to make sure that we are using the appropriate board-approved policies to do so. We want to ensure that we are affording all of our students the due process. So after the investigation, we want to look at the level of disruption and then identify the inappropriate behavior and evaluate the range of possible interventions and consequences. So with level 1, level 2, and level 3 behaviors, which we'll get to in just a couple slides, there are all equal interventions that we would like to apply to those. Again, inform the students and the parents of what happened, the applicable infraction, really just what happened, and the range of consequences, and then allow the student the opportunity to respond. So that's a really important piece in finding the root cause, is that we want to give the student the opportunity to respond and let us know what happened from their point of view. Because a lot of times, we get the ODR and it just has what the teacher says on there. We don't really get to see how the student felt and what made them behave that way. And then if at all possible, we would like to use our restorative justice education and practices. And then again, make every reasonable effort to stay in contact with our parents and report any findings to them as we go. When we talk about assigning interventions, we want to do our best to determine the best intervention that accommodates the following. So we want to make sure that we're maximizing student learning. We want to keep them in the classroom and in the building at all costs if possible. We want to improve student behavior. So again, going back to that, minimizing recurrence. We want to get at the root cause, identify why they're doing this so that we can adjust that so it doesn't happen anymore. Again, balance restorative practices. So we're not looking for the maximum punitive intervention, right? We are really looking to be restorative. Again, allow that student to get their side of the story out and get at that root cause. We want to make sure that the intervention we assign is in proportion to the behavior. So again, we're not assigning a level 3 intervention for a level 1 behavior, right? We want to make sure we follow that process. And then again, avoid removal from the class or from the school. In instances for students in our special education, we want to make sure that we follow all special ed and 504 guidelines. And then the last piece is to restore the relationship, restore that harm within the building. And so again, once we're done with everything, we want to make sure that we're reviewing our behavior expectations so students, staff, and parents all understand the expectations upon re-entering or going back to class. We also want to make sure that the classroom accepts the student without bias, that being classmates and teachers. And then we want to perform regular check-ins to ensure that we are sustaining that positive behavior adjustment, that positive progression is what we're looking for. And then, so before I move on to that, are any questions? Okay. So we'll move up. Sorry.
So this is just some guidelines that are included in the shared rights and responsibilities as it pertains to out-of-school suspensions. So with an out-of-school suspension, students are not allowed on school property. This includes any extracurricular activities, and it's considered an excused absence. Students must be given the opportunity to obtain their homework, be able to take tests, quizzes, or any special assignments, and they have to be able to complete any state assessments and any preparation that goes along with that. So this is just a guideline that is in the book as it pertains to the particulars of out-of-school suspensions.
That is in writing now?
That's in the current rights and responsibilities. Yep.
Is that a revision?
In the revised copy, yes.
So when you're being suspended out of school, you can still get your work done?
You are supposed to still be able to get your work done.
Okay. And
That's included in this new revised
The new
year rights and
revised.
responsibilities. Yep.
Fantastic.
Okay. So these are our definitions of behavior. So when I talked about the level 1, level 2, and level 3 behaviors, this is what I was referring to. Level 1 is our lowest level. It's just inappropriate behavior. These are any behaviors where the instructional process the instructional response takes place in the classroom. So this is just minors. The teacher can say, hey, I need you to get back on task, and we move forward. Moving up to level 2, to our seriously disruptive behaviors. These are behaviors where the instructional response takes place out of the classroom, but can still be administered by a teacher. I just need to pull the student out, have a quick talk with them, and then we get back to the class. And then we move up to level 3, our most seriously disruptive behaviors. This is where our instructional response switches, and it is administered by the administrator in the building or potentially our SRO. It's important to note that at each level, what we want to do is administer the lowest level intervention possible. Okay. You want that?
So we were talking about the data, right? So that data is compiled in the Office Discipline Referrals, or the ODRs. So this is just some information with regards to the purpose for an Office Discipline Referral, or the ODR. It is intended to collect the data. So it gives us an opportunity to understand what behaviors are being present in the building. It allows us an opportunity to identify patterns to target which interventions might best fit. So when we're looking at that data, if we notice that 80% of our students have a difficult time changing classes, what interventions do we need to put in place before that change in class happens so that they can be successful at what they need to do? And then it creates the opportunity for data-driven instruction. So like I mentioned, if we notice that students are having a difficult time with transitioning between classes, what instructional opportunity do we create so that they can be more successful? ODRs are not intended to be a rap sheet. They are not intended to collect evidence to use against the student at a later time, and it is not considered an intervention. It is simply an opportunity for us to collect the data on the behaviors that are being present in our buildings.
The students and parents' rights and responsibilities. And we want to make sure that all of our students and our families know that they have the right to attend a free and quality public education. We want them to feel safe in all of our buildings. We want our students to feel like they are being treated fairly. We want to make sure that they are able to present their concerns to whoever they need to speak to. They have a right to equal opportunity to share their point of view, so we want to make sure that they have a voice in the situations. We want them to know that they have the rights for any formal process for both verbal and written communication. We want to make sure that they understand their rights as it applies to any appeals processes. And then we want them to know that they have the right to engage in a peaceful and responsible demonstration. And our students' responsibility, we want them to be familiar with their student rights and responsibilities. We want them to be engaged. We want them to know that they are expected to follow the school policy and the guidelines. We want to encourage them very much to report any type of disruptive behaviors, but we also want them to be engaged in the school process, the school community. And just like our students, our parents also have rights and responsibilities as well. And we want our parents to know that they have a right to fair treatment. They have a right to be actively involved in their child's education. They have a right to prompt notification. They have a right to any information as it occurs according to appeals process. They have a right to regular correspondence and behavioral progress and academic progress. But they also have a right to access any of the policies and the procedures. And as far as their responsibilities, we want them to be familiar with the policy. We want them to promote their child, so promote positive student behavior. We want them to be responsible for bringing the school, their particular school, accurate contact information so that the schools can always have a good way to reach them. We want our parents to be responsible in communicating in a respectful and a timely manner, because sometimes our parents can disappear. We want them to be a collaborative partner with our students in the academic and behavior process. We want our parents to communicate any behavior expectations at home. We want them to support their child's learning, but also understand the school policies and procedures.
I have a question before you sit down. I want to know if I have to go, because to me, when one of my grandchildren act up, I always like to go to school and sit in that classroom with them. So will I be able to do that? I did that with all my kids. When one of them decided they want to go the opposite way, I was in class. I would get off from work and I would go to school. So I want to know if I can do that, because I really would love to.
I would typically, I'll just, maybe you have something to answer, but in common practice, parents and families, I think, should always have a relationship with their school and with that teacher and be able to have access to the classroom, depending on what's going on that day or what have you. I think if you sit down and have that relationship with the principal and the teacher, I would see why. In my past years as a classroom teacher, I have always welcomed parents, and it's always been a really good support. So thank you for that question.
Absolutely. I said the same thing. As a school social worker, I've always encouraged parents to come in because I used to do a lot of behavioral planning. So absolutely. I would say though that with COVID precautions, you want to make sure that you are in communication with the building principal so that they know and so that you know what's going on.
I want to ask the attorney, is there anything on the books that stops her from doing that, what she just made?
This is just off the top of my head. I would want to look at potentially FERPA, which protects student records from disclosure, and potentially some other confidentiality pieces. I'm not going to say no, she can't. I'm not going to say yes, she can. But I would want to make sure that we've kind of met any legal obligations around student confidentiality with that. Now, I knew we will also welcome volunteers into the classroom, and they go through background checks, so that would be another potential concern too, would be making sure that.
This is the reason I'm asking, because we want to make sure there's no breakdown in communication. If I not raise this question, she's going to think that she can walk up to the school if she get a call and says, I want to sit in the class with my student. That's not going to happen.
Well, yeah. So,
And
yeah,
unless
yeah.
there's been some revisions, because just like he just said, that there's a background check, and there's a positive and a negative side of it. The positive side of it is she's really going up there to check on her child and make sure that her child is behaved. There's a negative side of that, because we do have some parents that will go to school to jump on another child, and the principal has a responsibility to protect all of the kids. And so I know there are some schools to where if a parent wants to see their child, they can come and they can sit in the office. There's a conference room they can go up there when they dinner with them, but I'm not so sure they can actually sit in the classroom. Again, that will be left up to the building principal. I'm not sure what the rule is downtown. That's why I wanted to raise that issue. But
Well, yeah, that's why
I need you all to address the legalities of her actually doing that, and don't let her leave thinking that if she get a call, she can just walk in the classroom.
Well, again, the family and parent and community relationships is to build a relationship with parents. And I would imagine, again, like I said, it'd be important to have that relationship with the principal and to
Right.
stop, and we set that up front, yeah, just to make sure that that is okay. Depending on the day, what's going on in the school, there's different things that are happening throughout the year. And so, if you can't go to class, like you said, there may be an opportunity to speak with the child in a private room or something of that sort. It just really probably depends on many different factors, but that is why you have to be in communication with the school leadership.
Yeah, and I really want to commend you all, I really do, because what you just covered, our community, especially our black community, don't know this. They really don't know this. Just that information right there is worth having this meeting, because most of our black parents do not feel welcome going into the school unless there's a ball game or some type of activity. They don't know that they have that kind of connection. So for you all to make the first step and come out into the community and say, these are your rights, you are welcome. We literally want to establish a relationship with you, you, the administration, your child. You're to be commended for that. I appreciate it.
Well, let's see here, we have about just 5 more minutes, and we again want to thank each one of you for coming out today. And for our team, I think this might be number 14 or 15 sessions that we've had. We have 2 more tomorrow. One's going to be in person at 10 a.m. at Brown, and then our second one's going to be at 6 p.m. That's virtual.
Facebook Live.
Facebook Live. So again, we are in our administration team, and it's going to take everyone to do this work. It's like Stephanie said, it's a cultural shift. We're trying to get it right, and it's going to take all of us. And we thank you again for allowing us to come into your church today, and for each one of you coming out. And again, I want to thank our board members for being present. So have a fine night. We'll be here for a couple of minutes.